Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first event of the Act Up and Vote Festival. My name is Courtney Adams. I'm the Education Manager at Central Square Theater. Tonight, we are broadcasting from the tribal lands of the Massachusetts people, and we honor the ancestors and their descendants who live here today as we carry forward the tribal oral tradition of storytelling. On behalf of all the community partners that make tonight's event possible, we are thrilled that you are here with us. And also thank you for bearing with us while we overcame a couple of technical hiccups to get started. This performance tonight is brought to you in partnership with the City of Cambridge Citizens Committee on Civic Unity and YWCA Cambridge. Our thanks to them and their sponsors, the Cambridge Arts Council and Mass Humanities, which receive support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and is an affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So we are so pleased to begin the Act Up and Vote Festival today with this wonderful story of Fannie Lou Hamer, written and performed by Dr. Billie Jean Young. And due to the pandemic, Dr. Young was not able to travel to Cambridge to perform as we originally planned, but she generously created a recording of her performance so that we could still share it with you today. The performance runs just around an hour, and afterwards we'll transition into a panel discussion with Dr. Young and some other very wonderful Cambridge women about the legacy of the women's suffrage movement, particularly as it pertains to communities of color. That discussion will be led by Eva Martin Blythe from the YWCA. We'll begin just about 8 o'clock. Please note that we are recording today's performance and panel discussion so that we might be able to share it with community members who are not able to attend today. And with that housekeeping out of the way, I think we're ready to begin. Friends, please enjoy this little light.
People, where you live? Way down in the valley. Birds and the butterflies sticking at his eyes, and the poor little thing it cried, Mama, Mama went away, Daddy couldn't stay. They shall bring some horses, white and black, purple and gray, all them pretty little horses. Oh, when you wake, you eat a whole cake and you ride the pretty little pony. Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleepy little baby. I ain't no stranger to struggle. My mama taught me that song. Her mama taught it to her. See, my grandmama was a slave. I used to sing that song to my babies too. You know, while we was picking cotton, we used to have to leave our babies on the end of the road. And you would just have to hope and pray that the insects and flies, mosquitoes and things didn't get on your baby. Every year we get through picking cotton, sharecropping, for the white man. My mama still wouldn't have no money left to feed us. So she would ask the people who had a little cotton left in the field and didn't want to be worried with trying to get it if we could scrap it. My mama and her took going from field to field, scrapping cotton. Sometimes it'd be cold and the ground would be all froze up. And we wouldn't have no shoes. My mama would take our feet and wrap them up in paper and rags and tie them up with strings. We'd be going from field to field, scrapping cotton. People, where you little lamb? Way down in the valley. Birds and the butterflies picking at his eyes, and the poor little thing it cried, Mama went away, Daddy couldn't stay. That was Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. At least that's how I saw her many years ago over in Edwards, Mississippi, talking to a group of school children. You know, every once in a now and then, somebody moves in such a way that causes us to jerk up and take notice. Miss Hamer made some decisions during the 60s that caused some of us to stand up and follow, feeling a little stronger and going a little further because of the chances she took. Mississippi will never be the same. Bernice Regan said that about Miss Hamer. Good evening. I'm Issa Queen of Hopewell. I'm still hopeful that something good can come of me. I'm still hopeful that something good can come of you too. That's why I want to tell you about this lady named Fannie Lou Hamer was her name. And you see, I like the soil and I love the Delta dirt. Yeah, pick a little cotton too. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day. Oh Lord, pick a bale of cotton. Oh Lord, pick a bale a day. You know, when she was just 6 years old, Miss Hamer got tricked into picking cotton. Before that, she was just a baby girl playing along on the end of the road. Well, one day the boss man came by there and saw her and he looked at her. He said, you know, if you pick me just 30 pounds of cotton a day, I'll give you anything you want out of the commissary. That was his store on the plantation. Of course, Fannie Lou was just a baby girl and she wanted those treats. You know, in those days, children didn't get junk food and stuff the way they do now. Every time somebody goes to the store and come back. My mama said, and she right back on the same age with Miss Hamer. So it used to be you get an apple and an orange and a little stick of peppermint candy at Christmas time. If you had been good and was lucky, rest of the time you didn't see no treats. You remember how live apples and oranges used to smell in the house at Christmas time? That's because it was an unfamiliar smell to you. Those smells didn't enter the house too often. Anyway, Fannie Lou picked cotton really hard. This little cripple girl. She had polio when she was a child. And she picked that 30 pounds of cotton. And of course, the boss man was really happy. So he took it, he set up on the counter. He said, now what do you want? And she picked out some bubble gum and 2 cookies. And you see, he was quite pleased because the next week, he required her to pick 60 pounds of cotton every day. That was the beginning of Miss Hamer's cotton picking career. When she quit picking cotton 39 years later, she was 45 years old, and she was picking 200 and 300 pounds of cotton every day. Now, the reason Miss Hamer picked so much cotton, she was part of an evil system that they call sharecropping. Some people call it working on halves. All about the same, slavery, sharecropping, or working on halves. You do the work right, man, get the money. It didn't make no difference what you call it. You know, there was one thing about Miss Hamer too, She believed in calling a thing what it was. She wasn't after no foolishness and beating around the bush. She tell you the truth about a thing. I remember one time I saw her up in the East. You know, the women people had just started having those women conventions and talking out loud, and in public about how bad some of the men could be. Well, Miss Hamer had been invited to speak. Now, the girl who spoke in front of Miss Hamer just went on and on and on about how bad all the men were. Miss Hamer was the next speaker. I don't know about y'all's means, but my mind porch at night to get a house a chance to cool off before they went to bed. You know, it used to take the house until 11 o'clock at night to cool off. But one night in 1962, they were sitting out on the front porch. And I said, now give Pap some sugar. And give Mama some sugar too. Now go ahead on and go to bed. And don't you forget to say your prayers. You know, God got know it if you don't say your prayers. And hush that racket and go on to sleep now. You know school done started. Y'all hush that racket now and go on to bed because you know school done started. You know, Pap, it's a pity and a shame that ain't nothing up there act that racket in school with the teachers and the children and the walls. Children is smart too, you know. They know the books. They act children. Just like them children would come in here from up north. Pap, you know them is smart children too. No, I'm talking about the civil rights children, baby. You know, I hear some of them say in the mice meeting the other night that Negroes votes in other places. Did you hear them say? No, baby, I'm talking about like to have an election, you know, for the sheriff and the probate judge, school superintendent, things like that. You know, you always hear them around here talking about running and everything, but you don't ever hear them say nothing about us folks. But Pep, you know, I think if Negroes is live to vote in other places, we ought to be live to vote right here. What you think? Make it kind of sense to you? Oh, Pep, I want to go around yonder to Indianola next Friday and put my name on the voters registration list. Oh, Pep. I know we got to eat and sleep and have somewhere to stay, but that's all we ever been working for is eating and sleeping. We ain't got nothing but ourselves and these young children and a new day every year. Nothing bigger but a try. And me and you ain't got nothing to lose. Now, I'm thinking about the children, and you and me too. Because I'm 25 years old. I'm Mr. Timekeeper on this young place. I know what it makes. And you know what it makes too, because you're managing it. Oh, baby, there ain't got never call you to managing that. But you managing it just the same. Pep, it ain't got never do nothing for us. Don't you think one of us should go? Pep, I done already signed my name to the list to go. Pep? Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Kumbaya, my Lord. Kumbaya. Oh, Lord. Kumbaya. Somebody needs you, Lord. Kumbaya. Somebody needs you, Lord. Kumbaya. Somebody needs you, Lord. Kumbaya. Oh, Lord. Kumbaya. Ah, somebody pray, Lord. Kumbaya. Somebody pray, Lord, Kumbaya. Somebody pray, Lord, Kumbaya. Oh, Lord, Father, I come before your throne of undeserved kindness this evening with bowed head and humble heart, asking you to bring your spirit amongst us. We suffering, Lord, on these young plantations in Mississippi, and we need you, Father. We need you to go with us and stand by us and put the right kind of thing in our hearts. Go with the young folks and the old folks and help us and teach us what you would have us to do. Father, it was you who said that out of the mouth of babies, the truth could come. If these children is teaching us the right kind of thing in Mississippi, show us some kind of sign and go with us, Father, and show us what you would have us to do. I know, Father, if you go with us, I promise to go in your name. I promise to shoot for the shining star. I know, Father, that you is a powerful God. And just like you was with Jonah in the belly of the whale, and just like you was with the Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace, went down with Moses to Egypt, told him, tell old Pharaoh to let your people go. I know, Father, that you can deliver us. Father, if it's not your will, I don't want no parts of it. If it's your will for me to be a slave, then show me how. But if it's not your will, show us what you would have us to do. Father, if you go with us, I promise to go in your name. I promise to shoot for the shining star. I know, Father, that you is a help you. Ain't gonna let no police turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Now the white folks was mad about these 18 colored people and going down to Indianola to try to get registered to vote. Before Miss Hamer could get back home, the people from the courthouse had already called her boss man to let him know what one of the Negroes of his plantation was down there in Indianola trying to do. His name was Cropper. Lived right across the road from Miss Hamer and Pal. Here come Cropper. Pat? I said, Pat, you know that I'm a yarn is doing? Pat looked at him. I said, Pat, do you know what Fannie Lou is doing? Pat said, yes, sir. My wife told me what you're going when you left home this morning. You want to see her? You come back out the class. She'll be home soon. Do you know Cropper took himself on back home to his own house? Didn't know what Miss Hamer gone see. Now you would have thought he was finished, wouldn't you? Cropper right back out there in the yard. As soon as Fannie Lou came out. Fannie Lou, I like you and that. Y'all is hard-working people, honest people. I likes having y'all around. But I ain't gonna have you fooling around with this vote thing. Vote coming for the colored quick enough. You can't rush it. You're gonna have to get down there and get your name off of that vote list or just get off of my place one. Well, Miss Hamer was ready for that. So she just looked at him. She said, well, now, sir, see, I wasn't trying to register for you. I was trying to register for myself. Because the upshot of that was Cropper put Miss Hamer off his place that night. She and the children, Virgie and Dorothy, went up to the deacon's house and spent the night with the deacon's wife. Pat took him. He came on back home. Cropper wasn't finished. Next morning, he right back out there in the front yard. Pat, what you make Pat Lou gonna do? Pat looked at him. You know, a white person can ask you an impossible question sometimes. Pat said, my wife is gone because you put her out of the house. I might finish my crop and I might be gone too. Cropper know he would beat Dean, see. had finally hit that white man in his hip pocket where it hurt, see. He said, I tell you what then. You just tell Fannie Lou to just come on back home and everything will be there like it always was. Well, this time Pap pulled up on the overall bill and popped the strap. He said, no, so she said, that's just a trouble. She don't want things to be like they always was. Of course, they really couldn't stay there then. That was 31st of August, 1962. The next morning, Pap took Miss Hammond and the girls to a little house up in the woods, way back up in the hills. And they stayed up there until around Christmas time. Pap finished his crop. He got them a place in Ruleville, off the plantation. Now, you know Miss Hammond's name was Mud, don't you? People talking about him. Been put out the house, ain't got nowhere to go, fooling around with them civil rights people, running around like rats. You know how people do. Well, there was a lot of people in Mississippi, but the people would get together and go to other parts of the country to try to figure out what other people were doing. Well, they fooled around in 1963 and went to a workshop over there in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, one of the workshops was about sitting in. You know, black people used to not be able to sit down and eat in restaurants like regular people. So one of the workshops was on how you protest that. Child coming back, Miss Hamer and a group of young people got it in their mind to put their workshop into action. And you know, they got started in those little high-priced cafes, you know, that they have in the bus station. And it worked pretty good too, coming on down through South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. The people wouldn't serve them, but they didn't do nothing to them. Child, they got to Mississippi. Why not Mississippi? They took those people, threw them in jail, and nearly beat them to an inch of their lives. Had black people beating Miss Hamer now, mostly ladies. Miss Hamer, June Johnson, Sylvester Simpson, James West, and Miss Annelle Ponder. Lance Guillot went down there to try to get him out. He talked to him too big. He took him, threw him in jail, and beat him up too. Now, I wasn't there, but they tell me they beat those people unmercifully. Had prisoners beating Miss Hamer now. Don't that make you mad? What's up? What's up? What's up? Miss Hamer got out of that hellhole. She came home. She decided she'll tell Pap about it. I need to talk to you, Pap. Tell you how I feel. Oh no, not the shin. The shin just so fleshy wounds him. They got healed up. No, I'm talking about what happened to me inside, being in that jail, listening to them children screaming and crying. You know, Pap, I stopped being scared in there. Oh, I can't say I wasn't scared when it first happened now. We was all scared then. I was scared something was gonna happen to one of them children. Something bad. And I didn't want to have to face the parents about that. But God is good, you know. He let us all live. When they come at me, Pap, he had a big colored man with him, prisoner. And they give him whiskey, and then they posted him to beat us for him. And them sheriffs and them laws sit around laughing and talking and drinking whiskey, asking me questions about other people, calling me a communist, trying to make out like I done something to hurt somebody. You know, when that prisoner got tired, they brought out another one, and they posted him to beat us some more. They was lower than dogs, Pap. They beat me till my skin was hard. all up under my clothes. Skin didn't even have no feeling in it no more. But you know, it's a funny thing. I could hear them back there in the back. They come here so getting scared, you know, about what they had done. Longer they kept us in there. And they started trying to figure out what to do with us. I heard them talking about putting us in the river, in the Big Black. Late one night, they tried to come in a sail, you know, one night, and tried to fool us out of a sail so they could get us outside and tell a lie, shoot us down, tell a lie and say we had been trying to escape. I wasn't scared no more. I told white folks, you just gonna have to shoot me in my sail. I ain't going nowhere. I wasn't scared. After a while, Pep, I started being scared because I wasn't scared. Thought baby I was going crazy, baby. No, there's no point in you saying that. Now you know I can't hate nobody. Can't hate nobody and hope to see God's face. Them people were sick, Pep. They're foaming at the mouth. They need God's help. And no, there's no point in you saying that neither, because you know I might be right back out there. It's me and you in this thing now, baby. And we could make it if we just stick together. I know we can. Gonna lay down my burdens down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my burdens down by the riverside to study it war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study it war no more. Gonna try on my long white robes down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna try on my long white robes down by the riverside to study it war no more. From the first chapter of St. Luke, beginning at the 18th verse, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bound, and to preach the acceptable year of our Lord. Now the time have come that was Christ's purpose on earth. We only been getting by paying our way to hell, but the time is out. See, while Simon of Cyrene was helping Christ to bear his cross up the hill, he said, must Jesus bear this cross alone and all the world go free to know there's a cross for everyone and there's a cross for me. This consecrated cross I bear till death shall set me free, and then go home a crown to wear. For there's a crown for me, and there's no easy way out. You know, we're just gonna have to face it, folks. And if I can face this issue, you can too. You know, the thing what's pitiful about it, the men have been wanting to be the boss all these years. And now the ones what ain't hiding up under the house is up underneath. But you see, that's poison. It's poison for us to know the truth and not to stand up and speak what we know is right. Christ said, have made of one blood all the nations for to dwell on the face of the earth. And it's no different because of color. And brother, you can believe this or not. I have been sick of this young system here for as long as I can remember. I hear some people speak of depression, in the 30s. In the 20s it was depression. With me, depression, I have been as hungry. It's a funny thing. Since I started working for Christ, I've been standing in the field, and I was standing there wondering, what was I going to cook for supper that night? But you see, all them things was wrong. And I asked God, I said, my Lord, please make a, and you have to, no use in your line and stay in your ain't. Please to make a way for me, so I can stand up and speak for my race, and speak for all these young hungry children. And he opened up a way and all them opened up a bank account. See, made it so plain for us. He sent a man to Mississippi. Was the same man he sent with Moses to Egypt. Told him, go down Mississippi and tell the lost Barnett to let my people go. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All over Mississippi, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, all over Mississippi, I'm gonna let it shine. All over Mississippi, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Rock on and rock down. A lot of people getting registered to vote in the state of Mississippi. Poor people, poor whites, Indians, as well as the black. But in 1964, coming up on the national elections and the selection of a president, the people ran up against a problem. All the people were registered to vote, and the regular Democrats wouldn't let the people participate as Democrats with them. People had to take rather drastic measures. They organized themselves a political party, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, elected 68 delegates and took them to Atlantic City, New Jersey, to the National Democratic Convention. Miss Hammond and them got dressed up to go. And you know what? They even had a chance to sit in some of them smoke-filled rooms. Senator Humphrey, I ain't no stranger to struggle. Lots of things happen to you in this young movement work, Senator, but I've been in a struggle all my life. It was a struggle to get 68 of us up here to Atlantic City, New Jersey, to the National Democratic Convention, coming off of Cotton Row in Mississippi the way we did. But we kept us struggling, and we made it here. And we asking you for help. And I don't want to hear too much about this here regular Democratic Party and this here vice presidential nomination that you want. It's them people that's keeping us from voting in Mississippi, Mr. Humphrey. You can help us if you want. You just got to get up your nerves and go in there and do it. Mr. Wilkins, I know that you is a good spokesperson for the Negro peoples. You represent the NAACP well. And I know that I'm as not as sophisticated a politician as you. And I know that you can speak clearer than me sometime. But you see, I ain't never seen you in my community, Mr. Wilkins, and them is the people I represents. Them is the people I speaks for. And they done already told me, we didn't come all this young way for no 2 seats. All of us is tired. Mr. Humphrey, I know lots of people in Mississippi would have lost their job for trying to do what's right. I would run away from the place where I live and work most of my life just because I wanted to register to vote. Now you see, if you lose this young job, this young vice presidential nomination that you want, Senator, everything will be all right. God will take care of you. But if you take it this away, Mr. Humphrey, if you take it this away, well, you ain't gonna never be able to do nothing for poor people, peace, civil rights. None of them things you talks about, Senator Humphrey. Senator Humphrey, I pray to Jesus for you. Mr. Chairman and members of the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Centennial, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Ruleville, Sunflower County, Mississippi, the home of Senator James O. Eastland. It was in September 1962 that 18 of us traveled to Indianola, Mississippi to try to become first-class citizens. We was met by Mississippians, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us to take the literacy test at one time. We were not allowed to register to vote in the state of Mississippi, and we have been fighting for our lives ever since. 1962, 6 of us were taken off a bus in Winona, Mississippi, and nearly beat to death. I was placed in a cell with a young woman named Miss Vesta Simpson. After a while, I could hear a sound of somebody saying, "Can you say yassa, nigga? Nigga, can you say yassa?" And I could hear my friend, Anel Ponder. I could hear her trying to answer. I could hear her trying to pray. And it wasn't too long before 2 white men come to my cell for me. Well now, just about the time Ms. Hamer started to tell him about the beating she took in Mississippi on national television, President Johnson called a press conference. Some of them said it was because they discovered an iceberg over in East Siberia. Some of them said it was to get Ms. Hamer off the TV. But whatever the reason, Ms. Hamer couldn't be silenced after that. She was to receive many awards, speak all over the world, hold press conferences. You see, because after that, she just spoke for herself. I thank you. To the president of Morehouse College, faculty and student body, I want to thank you for inviting me here today. I have just left Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, where I received an honorary doctorate of humane letters. And I'm on my way to Howard University in Washington, D.C., where this evening I expect to receive another honorary doctorate of humane letters. And I want to thank you, Morehouse College, for this young plaque. Sunflower County. Sunflower County. You know, I think it's worse than Rhodesia, South Africa. Because it is stiff with a power structure over there. And it's just one man here, and that's the senator. And these landowners is the worst in the world. They're beginning to tell the people now that they shouldn't get registered and telling them to leave the freedom schools alone. You know, they have freedom schools now where we're teaching the children about themselves, about Africa and everything. Some of them teaching 9 months out of the year. Some of them teaching year round. Well, Well, except that they didn't get the children out of the freedom schools and put them in the regular schools, they're gonna cut them off of welfare. It's one of the biggest, crookedest things that ever been handed down from Washington, D.C. And we're fighting it because it's so unjust. You know, the director of the CAP agency admitted to me just the other day that the chairman of the Poverty Board in Sunflower County is a member of the White Citizen Council. But see, the government grant people like that money to enslave us more. We need federal registrars in Sunflower County to get the people registered and some political education so they can understand this young man's trick and understand that as long as he controls the money, he gonna control the Negro. Now see, we have proof that they have been going to the people who's been on welfare and telling them that they didn't get the children out of the freedom schools and put them in the regular school, they're gonna cut them off of welfare. It's nothing but political tricks. Sunflower County is still one of the most poverty-stricken places in the country. After all this young poverty money, people here for the past 300 years been eating pork and grits, poking their feet under the table and gritting their teeth. I'm just about tired of it too. You know the thing about these young bills, it's okay to pass a bill. But what is you going to do by enforcing them laws already on the books? If the Constitution means anything to me, enforce it. A lot of people think everything is all right, you know, because we had the Voting Rights Act passed. Well, it's not. They're doing a lot of things undercover, but they're still doing the same thing. They get a chance, they'll lynch a man just as quick today as they did in 1925. They is working to preserve segregation. And one of the ways they can do it, they take the shrimp poverty money and get a lot of work done on the shrimp plantations. And then you see they can take their money and use it to keep things more segregated than they ever was in these shrimp private schools. Child, this young white folk know how to maneuver. And we better learn how to maneuver too. The shrimp poverty money just like manna. You know, we can stay and catch it when they drop it out of Washington, D.C. But if we don't never learn how to make us none, we ain't gonna never have none. That's economic power. It disturbs me very much that for 400 years, people identified with white power. Then long come one little innocent man said, black power, that can turn the world upside down. You know, you have Jewish holiday. Italians have a holiday. Puerto Rican Day. St. Patrick Day, and black people can't say a thing. People, this is a tactic. We just got to understand that every nation on earth got to identify with its own people, wherever they are. There's nothing wrong with being black. And if we get into power whatsoever, what would you call it? Pink power? It's not pink power, it's black power. Press is treating us like we criminals. They try to bring me a communist. I don't know much about communism as a house do by Christmas. Do communism mean the same thing as these things we're working for? I never met a communist to no one in my life. Communism, we fight hungryism, the right to a job, some food to eat, somewhere decent to stay. You know, a lot of folks don't understand what I mean when I say I ain't fighting no more for no equal rights. Well, you see, if you raise question about the history of this young country and understand that we have been the only people who have been nonviolent, could stand up for dignity and human respect. And then you look around the history of this young man and see what he done to the American Indian and to generation after generation of people all over the world. And you understand what I mean when I say I don't want no more his equal rights. I'm fighting for something you never know too much about. Human rights. You see, whether you're Jewish, Chinese, Italian, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Korean, it don't make me no difference what color you are, whatever race you are, I'm for you. If you're a human being. And human respect is something he didn't know too much about. Because if he did, we'd have been treated better. I question America. I used to say when I would work so hard in the cotton field, but let's get to Washington, get to the Congress, get over there to the Justice Department, get over there to the FBI, get close enough upon them. You know, let them know what's going on in Mississippi. I was sure that I could change things in just 1 week. Now that I have traveled across America, been to the Congress, to the Justice Department, to the FBI, I'm faced with some things I ain't too sure I wanted to find out. This is sickness in Mississippi, ain't no Mississippi sickness. This is America's sickness. Assassinated Martin Luther King. He didn't pass a law and tell us how good they is. Oh, it's 1972, now I can buy me a house on their side of town. You tell me how am I do that when I can't pay the rent well at night? But you see, that law did have something in it for me. It said if I get 3 people together and tell them the truth about something, they can put me in jail for conspiracy and inciting to riot. They didn't get Martin Luther King long as he was high class. But when he started talking about helping the poor people, the poor whites, Indians, as well as the black, they said, we got to kill this nigga. And it ain't Memphis. It's the same kind of conspiracy. Killed King, killed Kennedy, killed Malcolm X. And they got the concentration camps ready. And all I can say is you better get ready. You better get ready. I'm never sure anymore now. When I leave home, whether I'm gonna get back or not. It seems like, to tell the truth today is to run the risk of getting killed. But you know, if I fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom, I'm not backing off of that. And don't nobody need to cover no ground I walk on, as far as freedom is concerned. Let's face it, folks. What's hurting these young black folks that's without is hurting the white folks that's without. But if the black folks fight for themselves and the white folks fight for themselves, we both just got crumbled apart. These are things we're gonna have to fight for together in America. And I'm perfectly willing to help make my country what it needs to be. No, Christianity is a funny thing. Christianity means being concerned about your fellow man. Not building $1 million church while people starving right around the corner. Christ was a revolutionary person out there in the streets where it was happening. That's what God is all about. And that's where I get my strength. Folks, we got to realize just how grave this your problem is in the United States today. And I think the 6th chapter of Ephesians, the 11th and the 12th verse, will help us to understand just what it is we up against. He said, put on the whole armor of God, that he may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. So we're wrestling not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. That is what I think about when I think about my own work in this fight for freedom. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened it, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bound, and to preach the acceptable year of our Lord. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired me home to the light and take my hand, precious Lord, and lead your child home.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Young for sharing that performance with us. We really wish we could have had you here live with us out at Starlight Square, but even with the technical difficulties with the streaming, it's clear that your portrayal of Fannie Lou Hamer is extremely powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I would like to take a moment now to invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and join us in the space. And it is my privilege to introduce our moderator for this evening's conversation, Eva Martin Blythe.
Thank you, Courtney. Very few things leave me speechless, but this performance really almost brings tears to my eyes, and if I let it, it would bring tears to my eyes. Thank you, Dr. Young.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing Fannie Lou Hamer with us. Some of us might remember her at the convention, the 64 convention, but not necessarily in her environment at home or in her interactions with others, with other politicians, with politicians of significance who she looked to influence. I certainly was struck by the similarities between things that she was saying 50 odd years ago and the things that the Black Lives Matter movement is saying today. As things change, they remain the same. And that's a sad commentary. That doesn't mean that we should stop or by any stretch of the imagination be deterred from the work that's ahead of us. I want to say thank you to our panelists, and in just a moment, I'll ask them to each introduce themselves. But I want to take just a moment and tell you why this performance and why this activity is important to the YWCA. Nationally, our mission is the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. Some number of months ago, we began to talk about, and Counselor Simmons was very much involved in this discussion, about the whole area of women's suffrage and how Black women had not been included, invited, or enabled, or in many instances allowed to participate. And that prompted a whole larger discussion about the voting rights movement, about voter suppression, about women's suffrage. And it's out of that discussion, out of those discussions grew the desire to invite Dr. Young here to do this play. Had it not been for the COVID virus, we would be seeing this play, interacting with her in real life and with the other panelists in real life in real time. But not to be deterred, Central Square Theater made it happen, and we thank you. And we hope that at some point in the future that we'll be able to bring you to Cambridge, Dr. Young, and meet you personally and work with you personally. But certainly in the absence of that, again, I thank you. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Young, Dr. Billie Jean Young, and in turn, we'll have a chance to meet each of the panelists and then have some questions and answers with them. There'll be an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask questions, and not just about the play and not just about our panelists' work in the social justice and racial justice movement, but also if you have questions about voter registration, because that too is a significant piece of this whole Act Up and Vote effort. So again, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Billie Jean Young, who will tell you a bit about herself, and then we'll move on to the other panelists and then on to questions. Dr. Young?
Thank you, Eva. First, I'd just like to thank Central Theater for doing this. Of course, I sit there and cringe because I've been doing this show now for over 37 years. And so I've kind of grown with it. And so, of course, the glitches hurt me. Oh, I'm hearing something else. Do you hear that?
Yes.
I'm hearing the debate. That's what you hear? Oh, okay. All right. So, anyway, I first met Ms. Hamer, I believe it was 1969, over in Tuskegee, Alabama. And she just kind of blew us away. We were young secretaries and we'd gone to a farmers meeting for the co-op. And we got a chance to meet her. I asked her why was she doing this kind of work, and she said, why did she choose to do this kind of work? And she said, baby, I didn't choose, I was chosen. And that was stayed with me for years. So once I went to law school, and she died, and I wasn't able to go to her funeral. As luck would have it, I moved to Mississippi, and I was organizing rural women, and they would invoke her name. She had only been dead a few years, but the regular people, there were many regular people who didn't know about Miss Hamer. And I'm just being so distracted by this by the debates.
I'm sorry, I don't know if we can track down what the source of that sound is. I can understand the distraction.
Okay, so well, just know that that's what's going on.
Okay.
You can hear me though.
Please continue.
Okay, and so I decided, because I've been doing theater, I had been doing theater then with young people for many years. I just thought, you know, this needs to be told. This story needs to be told. And so I went into the Delta, talked to Pap and the girls, and asked for their permission to do this. And they gave me permission. My first show was at Tougaloo with many people who had been with her scant years earlier. And I was quite young then. And so I got a little bit afraid because I realized at that point that I wasn't doing some character that nobody knew, but these were her friends and colleagues. And they not only did they accept it, but they encouraged me. I met Miss Anel Ponda, who was in jail with her that night. And she said to me, please keep on. She said, for a minute, I thought Fannie Lou was still here with us. And so I was encouraged by that. My second show was in Ruleville. I was invited to her home, and her girls gave me her room to change in. And it was like she left it. Her wig stand was still there, pictures of her on the wall. And I became very frightened in there, but I prayed, and I was never frightened again. When I came out of the room, Pap and the girls everybody had left. They had left me in the house by myself, and they had already gone to where the performance was going to be held. And so that's one of the things that I do before a performance. I've done this as an itinerant a performer, going from place to place one night at a time, over 800 performances around the world and around the United States. So it's not always the best situation I was in, but one of the things I always do is I pray. I pray that same prayer, and I'm never afraid. I have I performed this show under police guard in Antigua, where the church had brought me there, and the powers that be did not want to hear it, but they brought me there anyway, and I performed under that protection. it's been a journey. I call it trotting with Fannie Lou. And that's what I do. I carry her story. I have to apologize for the tech. I don't know how to do tech, so I have to hire people to do it. And I apologize for the lateness of the hour. I have egg on my face. You don't know what it means to me to see that happen to you. But at some point later, perhaps we will be able to do it in another way. I'm a consummate director of theater with young people. That's what I do every day at the college where I work. And so I love you all. Thank you so much. I've said enough.
Thank you, Dr. Young, and no apology necessary. I say of technology regularly that it's wonderful when it works, and when it doesn't, it just doesn't, and it will make your life miserable. But we're overcomers. Everybody on this panel and everybody in this space is an overcomer, and we understand how to go over, under, around, or whatever the case might be to get where we need to be. And so we thank you and we appreciate you, and we're so glad that you're here with us. Certainly not in the real, but in the remote way. And so let me move on. Dr. Janet Moses is our second panelist, and I'm asking you, Dr. Moses, to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself before we proceed to questions.
Okay, my name is Janet Moses. I'm a resident of Cambridge. However, I'm talking to you from Florida, Hollywood, Florida, where Bob and I have fled the cold, the impending cold in Boston, in the Boston area. I'm a former member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and if I shouldn't, it's not former, because I think all of us that are still, all of us who are in SNCC, who are still standing, view the bonds that were created and the work that was done in a way that will carry us through all of our lives. And so I was in SNCC, but insofar as there are many people in SNCC who are still alive, I still feel that that bond and that circle and the work that SNCC was about. SNCC, I've taught school. I'm a retired pediatrician. I'm a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 7. The youngest one is about 2 months old. And I've been a community activist primarily in Cambridge, looking at the issue of education and particularly math education in Cambridge. So I don't know whether there's anything else that I need to add to that, but I think that that's enough for now.
Well, we'll know you more and better as we go into the question session.
Right.
The last, but certainly not the least panelist that I want to introduce is Counselor Edie Simmons. And I could say lots about her, have a tremendous amount of experience working with her on a number of different social and racial justice projects, but her reputation speaks for itself. And I will invite Counselor Simmons to introduce herself.
Thank you, Eva. And let me just first start by saying a huge thank you to Dr. Young. As soon as you started telling the story and you said Tuskegee, my eyes opened and my ears perked up because my mother grew up in Tuskegee. So somehow we are connected in some way. So it's just, first of all, to say a pleasure to have you here with us, even if it's virtually. And to echo what Eva said, when this pandemic leaves us, we look forward to having you in our midst. To the Central Square Theater, who is such an artist station in Central Square that brings us so much joy through the art that they do, and then to ever, and the YWCA, I got to say this, with the YWCA, Ever and I get into what I call good trouble, trying to speak up and act out around issues of race and class, but most importantly, the empowerment of women. So it's a pleasure to be here. Cambridge is my hometown, lived here all my life, but I often say northern born, southern raised, because my mother was from Tuskegee, and I spent so many days in Tuskegee. But here in Cambridge, I find it a wonderful opportunity to be able to live and work in the city that's your home. And so it was always a pleasure for me as an adult to be able to work here and work for the Civic Unity Committee, which was an organization established in the city back in 1945. And its primary purpose was to help African-American soldiers coming back from World War II to be able to reintegrate into the city, because when they got here, they couldn't find jobs, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't get housing because of rampant discrimination. I came to the Civic Unity Committee in 1980 as their executive director, would stay there for a decade before I went on to the school committee, and after the school committee on to the city council, where I've had the pleasure to have been chosen to be the mayor for twice in 2008 and then later in 16, 17. So I love the work that I do. There's a lot of it. I often say when it comes to Cambridge, as progressive as we are, we're on the road, but we're not there yet. It's a pleasure to be here and talk. And I have to shout out to Dr. Moses, who I don't see nearly enough. So happy to have this opportunity to share this opportunity, just to kind of talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, the work that she has done, the path that she has paved, and what we need to do going forward. Thanks so much.
Guess I should unmute, otherwise you'll just see my mouth moving. Now on to questions. Dr. Young, I want to start with you. And you actually answered one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and that was whether had you had the opportunity to meet and spend time ever with Fannie Lou Hamer, and had she seen your play. But let me back up from that and ask the question, what inspired you? What brought you to the place that you wanted to devote a significant part of your time, your energy, your career to bringing her to life for those of us who didn't have the pleasure of knowing her other than a little snippet that we saw on television?
Sorry, Dr. Young, you will need to unmute. Yes, thank you.
When I moved to Mississippi, and listened to activist women speak about her, I happened to go to Washington, and one weekend in December of 81, and I saw, I picked up a Sojourner magazine, which had done a series of articles on Miss Hamer. And I was reading the magazine. I picked up several copies because it just wasn't a magazine you could get in Jackson, Mississippi. So I picked up several copies to give as gifts, and I got a chance to read it. And I began to read about her, and I realized how little I knew about her. I had thought, you know how we think we know people? And you really don't. You just know what other people think or what the snippet is about them. And so I started to cry because she'd been dead then for 7 years. I think it was about 7 years. And it was from at that point, the light bulb went off and said you could do something. If you don't have to do a play with a lot of people, because I always had trouble getting everybody to come to be in my plays. And it's hard to have a rehearsal with 2 or 3 people for when you got 6 in the play. I said, you can do this yourself. And you don't have to be all slim and trim to do Fannie Lou. That was December, and in November, we premiered the show.
Wow.
The important thing for me, because Mississippians had told me I probably shouldn't do it. I was from Alabama, when I don't think there's a nickel's worth of difference. But that's why I went to see Pap and the girls. And the girls showed him a picture of me, and he looked at it and he said, "That's show her, ain't it?" And we all kind of froze because he was thinking that the PR picture was Miss Hamer. And I wish she could have seen it. I wish she could know. Somehow I feel like she trots along with me. I have been healed doing this performance. So many things have happened to me as a result of making the decision to carry Miss Hamer's story. She speaks my mother's tongue. The voice I heard as a child growing up. I learned how to speak the King's or Queen's English, but that's the language that I heard growing up. And I wanted to put it in the airways because there's wisdom that comes from people who are not formally educated. And I knew and so it honors my mother and all those Black Belt women and Mississippi Delta women and Deep South women who have put their lives on the line to work for us. Many times unheard of. And I wanted Fannie Lou to be known. The men were getting what they should have, many of them were, as a result of their work in the movement. But you rarely heard any of the women, even in those times, talk about Fannie Lou. And I wanted to change that. And I think we succeeded after over 800 performances throughout the US and on 4 continents. I believe we succeeded in raising the level of awareness about Fannie Lou Hamer and who she was.
Absolutely. You brought her to life for us, and we're eternally grateful.
Dr. Young, so I'm sorry, before you continue, it sounds like the debate might be playing in your space. I don't know if it is, if that's something that we want to hear your words and not necessarily Vice President.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
It's all right. if you can't, we'll just roll on.
It's so close on me.
All right.
I'll try. I'll see what can happen.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Moses, you were in SNCC in Mississippi. And at one point, if I understand it, about in the same time frame that Fannie Lou made her initial public statement at the Mississippi as part of the delegation to the 1964 Democratic Convention. And that was the time of the birth of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Was there a time when your paths overlapped? Was there an influence at all between her work and SNCC? Tell us a little bit about that. Was there something to tell us about that?
Yes, I think so. And I'm going to, Eva, I'm going to reframe the question.
Okay.
Because I think what's very important and what's lost in the history is the role of this insurgent group of young people, along with people who advocated for the right to vote, who basically led an insurgency against the state of Mississippi. And what Mrs. Hamer represents is not only that insurgency, and I'm talking about SNCC, which organized the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, separate from SNCC, under the guidance of Ella Baker, who gave Bob the list of those people who should be contacted in Mississippi, among whom was Amzie Moore. And Amzie told Bob, my husband, that what we needed in Mississippi was a voter, not just voter registration, but we needed to vote so that we could really have control over our lives, get what he called first-class citizenship, which meant safety from the iteration of the Ku Klux Klan, which was the White Citizens Council, which meant employment, which meant housing, which meant control over our lives, to live as first-class citizens and human beings. So that was the instructions. Those were the instructions that Bob was given. And it's very interesting because when we think of, and I'm saying this because there is a deep history out of which Fannie Lou and all of her brilliance and her bravery evolves. And that goes back even beyond SNCC. But the people who helped organize the voter registration campaign in Sunflower County. I'm thinking of Claudia Liddell, I'm thinking of Uvestra Simpson, I'm thinking of Charlie Cobb, I'm thinking of Dory Ladner. These were young people in their late teens who had been sent into SNCC, sent into the county to live with the people. Mrs. Hamer was sent by SNCC to Septimus Clark in Charleston, in South Carolina. So there's a whole network of movement against the status quo in this country. I was in, I did not go to Washington, D.C., to Atlantic City. I'm sorry, it wasn't Washington, D.C., it was to Atlantic City with the challenge. I stayed in Mississippi. And so what I'm telling you is sort of secondhand about what happened in Atlantic City. But what I understand and what all of the SNCC workers understood was that the claim of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and it's really very important, the party that was going to, that represented the people in Mississippi, not the White Citizens Council, not the main Democratic Party that was being seated at the National Democratic Convention, that was seated, right? That Fannie Lou Hamer was denied. The sharecroppers and day workers of Mississippi who had organized a party, right, to address their interests was denied, not only by the powers that be. And Dr. Jean Young does a beautiful listening to the play when she talks about Humphrey and the soliloquy between Fannie Lou and Humphrey when she challenges him. And she challenges, I think there was some of, I forget now who else she challenged. But all of these people were, including the president, were organized against the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. And so when Fannie Lou says that I didn't go to Mississippi, I didn't go to Atlantic City for no 2 votes, what she is saying is that the people of Mississippi, the Mississippi Freedom, they will not be window dressing. They have real demands that they want to be met. And they are not, the job of Black people in this country is not to be mules for the Democratic Party or any party, right? And so what she said, and that experience in Atlantic City is one that is sort of given short shrift. It's given short shrift because Fannie Lou could never, as wonderful, as brilliant, as brave, she emerges within a history of struggle, within a history, with an activity of insurgency. And without that, she would have ended up just being, she was the counter. When I say the counter, it's not the counter, but she was the timekeeper on the Barlow plantation, right? So she would have stayed there, right? She went down to Indianola to vote with a group of people who had been organized by SNCC to go down. And it was not just herself, but there were other women who were also part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. But that history is really instructive for where we are today, because we do not have, when you think about what are the demands that we as a people are making, right, are making to this country right now, those demands have been diluted, right? We are told that we need to go down and register to vote. We are not told why we need to go down and register to vote. What are the issues? incarceration, employment, the lack of employment, the lack of housing, the lack of education. These are the reasons. So people in Mississippi were organized around the vote so that they could have these things, right? And we in 2020 are still back in 1964 where MFDP left off, right? We do not have a party, a group, I'm looking for the word, of people whose key interest, primary interest, is the well-being and the liberation of Black people in this country. And I think Dr. Young, I mean, looking at how Fannie Lou evolves, because she does evolve, right? And she begins to raise these issues at the end of the play. But I think that that's where we have to go. And we have to raise not only Fannie Lou up, but what made a Fannie Lou Hamer possible.
Thank you. The book, Hands on the Freedom Plow, is the story of women who were involved in SNCC at varying levels. And I know that Dr. Moses, you played a role in the evolution of that book. What was, you talk about your experience with Fannie Lou Hamer in terms of the women involved in SNCC at various levels. Is there a memorable experience for women in SNCC that stands out among other or above other memorable experiences?
That's a very hard question. The woman, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. Hands on the Freedom Plow is a series of essays written primarily by Black women who were in SNCC. There is another book that was written primarily by white women who had been in SNCC. What I can say about the role of women in SNCC is that there wasn't a role for women. We were comrades. Everyone who was a member of SNCC understood that you were risking your life. And you got no kudos for being a woman, and you got no kudos for being a man. What was important is that the work be done. I guess a memorable experience, it's hard to think of one experience. One thing that was very memorable is the fact that and I was blessed to be part of a group of people who were so dedicated, ragtag, but completely focused on the work that had to be done. And the work was thought of as liberating for our people. Saying that, there are a couple of experiences that I had. One was in Fayette, Mississippi. I had been working in Natchez and then had moved to Fayette. And we had the first voter registration day in Fayette. And voter registration is very different. People risk their lives. They risk their lives. And so I'm flitting around encouraging people to come up to the courthouse. These are people that we had visited many times before. And Mr. Brown called me over and he said, and I've written, this is what I've written about in the book. He said, Miss Johnnet, and it was, he said, don't you worry. He said, you just go ahead and do what you're doing. And I was really a little taken aback because he was one of the key local contacts, and he wasn't going up to register. He was sitting on the side by the courthouse with a group of, I don't know, 3 or 4 other African-American men, all of them old. And he said, don't you worry. And he opened up a paper bag and he had me, I looked in the paper bag and there was a big gun. There was a .45. And what he is telling me is that I will put my life on the line to make sure that people can, not people in general, but that people in my community can vote. And so don't you worry, right? I may not go up to that courthouse. And I think eventually he did, but he said, don't worry, right? Now, that struck to what I think about, and I'm tearful, because when you think about what does it mean to risk your life for someone else, right? Or to dedicate, how many people would do that, right? But the level of work, the kind of work, the insurgent work, and Mr. Brown had always been there. I didn't inspire him to do that, but his courage, I mean, he had lived in Mississippi all of his life, right? And so here I am, a skinny little girl. I mean, it was the knock on the head that this is more than serious, right? And to be in the presence and to work with people who feel that freedom and liberation is so great that they would sacrifice their lives. If he stood up, he would have been a goner, right? In Mississippi, a Black man with a gun, right, as part of a protest protecting people who are registering other Black people to vote, right? So the depth of the work and what the work actually was, it wasn't just a ballot, but was about really an opportunity, an effort at really liberating themselves from, Mississippi was a slaveocracy. And Mrs. Hamer, Dr. Young, you pointed out so well, Mississippi was America, right? Mississippi was America, right? And so the work in Mississippi was really about undoing 400 years of the slaveocracy in this country. And unfortunately, we have not moved very far from that situation. We have not moved very far. And the prisons in this country are the plantations, right, that existed. I remember going on a plantation, and it was in the Greenwood area. And I think this was the time around the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, because I was working primarily in the Southwest, in Natchez and Fayette. So I'd gone up to Greenwood, people had gone to Atlantic City, and we went out on one plantation to talk to people about voting, right? On this plantation, there's no electricity. There are no bathrooms, right? There was no money. People were exchanging their labor for fatback, for meal, right, from the commissary. So this was 1964, the end of 1964. This was slavery. This was no different, right? Absolutely no different. And so I think that we have to really tell the story of where we are now. And I think that Mrs. Hamer and SNCC, and Dr. Young talks about a Nell Ponder, it wasn't just SNCC, right? But the people who had organized an insurgency to really liberate ourselves, and what some of the obstacles were, right? And you talk about it in the play, it was Humphrey, it was Johnson, but it was all the civil rights, the major civil rights organizations, right, would not support Fannie Lou and the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. None of the civil rights organizations would, because they had a different idea about what democracy should be and why we should vote, right? And so here we are, right? We vote, but we're not clear about what for, right? And one of our key issues, which is the incarceration of our men, is not on the ballot. It's not on the ballot.
Thank you. I think that you helped us add even more perspective to this discussion. And I was struck by one of the phrases that Dr. Young used that was a Fannie Lou Hamer phrase, and that was American sickness. The American sickness continues. The sickness that you experienced, Dr. Moses, you saw, you worked to combat while you were in Mississippi, Dr. Young, the work that you've done in terms of your taking the Fannie Lou Hamer story to the public brings to light the American sickness. And that brings us to who represents us now, and how are we represented as part of the electoral process. And as flawed as the electoral process is, it's what we've got. You know, I hope that at some point in my lifetime it will be better. I trying to explain the Electoral College to a young person not too long ago, and finally I decided I don't want to do this anymore. I feel like I'm telling a lie. But there are elected officials, and Councilor Simmons is one of them, who speak truth to power, who bring to the table the concerns of people in our community, in this community, and that's important. And I think that one of the things that I want to ask you, Councilor Simmons, is you've spent most of your adult life in public service, and in public service for the city of Cambridge. City Cambridge is predominantly a white community. From the statistical perspective, I think it's still about 66% white, and then the balance is made up of Black people and Latinx and other ethnic groups and nationalities. But what does it mean for you to be a public servant, an elected official in a community where the voices of people of color, particularly Black people, aren't necessarily heard, as they weren't heard 40, 50 years ago, but it's a significant part of your responsibility to bring that message to the council chambers, to the other members of council, and to try and influence them to our side, if you will?
I'll try to answer that question, but before I do that, something that Dr. Moses said that I thought about. I mentioned earlier that I'm northern raised, meaning I grew up here in Cambridge, but northern born, but southern raised. It brought to mind something that you said, Dr. Moses, what you talked about. You Black people want to vote because they want to control over their own lives. So let me just start my answer, not directly answering your question, but kind of my own experience about how did I end up in Massachusetts. And I used to always say that to my mother, you could have stopped in Washington. She came out of Tuskegee, and one of the two stories she would always tell was, here I am. Here's my mother went to Tuskegee University. At the time, it was Tuskegee Institute, and talked about the richness of that experience, and Booker T. Washington, and who was there and how it was. But she also told the story about why she couldn't stay. And she said, I couldn't stay because I knew I better not try to go to the polls and vote. She wanted freedom over her life. She wanted control over her own life. And that's what brought her out of Tuskegee. Now, I don't want to paint a picture of a rose garden when she got here to Massachusetts, because the level of discrimination that she experienced here was undaunting. Here she was, a college educated woman, and could do nothing more than be a governess when she got to Massachusetts, particularly when she showed up for jobs and they saw that she was a Black woman. And what she would say that I would scoff at, they would always say, and you speak so well. But that's what got me here to Massachusetts, and probably put my feet on this road toward sort of equal opportunity. The other experience that was also very vivid for me, that put me on this road of public service, was being in the South again, and going into we called them filling stations at the time. And when I went there to go to use the facilities, I remember the door being locked. So I go back into the front of the filling station, and I say to the gentleman, the restroom, the women's room is locked. And he says to me with a surly Southern drawl, go round back. And when I walked around back, there was the colored bathroom, with no door. And I don't think it had been cleaned since the building was built. It was nasty. You know, going outdoors would have been a better experience. And we just I just passed on it. But I remember before I passed on it, going to my grandmother, rushing by my grandmother, because I want to give this man, this white man in this filling station, a piece of my mind. And my grandmother said to me, "You'll get us killed." Those experiences really set me on this path of wanting to make life different, not only for my kids, but in their memory and for them, because they could not do that. Because my grandmother, this, you know, extraordinary woman that ran a farm, had enough fear to know that fighting over to go into the bathroom was not a fight worth dying over. And so that's what sort of got me wanting to do something different. Now, your question, I may have to ask you to re-ask it, was why do this work, or how hard it is doing this work. It goes back to the question of why, if you don't vote, you have no voice. You know, I live in the port, and the port is probably still, in terms of all the wards and precincts or all the neighborhoods, one that is probably more modest in income, but it's the one that gets the least amount of services and has to wait the longest. And still, sometimes I have to go into the neighborhood and remind people, if you don't voice yourselves by using the vote, you will not get the services that you deserve. You will not get the education your children deserve. You won't get the health care that you need. You won't get a affordable supermarket in your neighborhood. Those things that other people, not even that far away, because Cambridge is only 6.2 square miles, and that includes the water. You know, but if you go 4 miles up the road, it's a totally different experience. And so trying to remind my community, the community that I chose to live in, that it was imperative that you go and be heard, and it is easy as your vote. And remembering, and I do this with my kids, trying to teach them this all the time, is it's, even though we have it, we don't have it. There's always these false impediments that are put in our way to keep us from getting to the polls and having our voices heard. So I cannot say enough, we cannot say enough, you know, the work that Fannie Lou Hamer and other women like her that have done has yet to be realized in so many ways. And it is heart-wrenching to know that that is still the case. You know, here in Cambridge in particular, which is an extraordinarily wealthy city, to have this disparity. My wife often says, you know, Cambridge's dirty secret, which is we're not a city of equals, is very, very, very true. You're going to have to re-ask that question, because I know I've gone off the path, but I just felt moved to tell that part of the story.
You haven't gone off the path, you've created a path. You are continuing along the path that we have set for ourselves, particularly as Black women. And I'm sensitive to the time, and I want to shift gears for just a moment, because one of the themes of this evening is the whole idea of, and let me get it right, the Women's Vote Centennial, a historical perspective. And so not only have we looked at the life and the contributions of Fannie Lou Hamer, but, you know, in this 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, it's an irony. It's a misnomer. You know, there are lots of different words that we could use when we think about the fact that, you know, there's all this credence paid to 100 years ago, women were given the right to vote, but those were white women. And effectively, as part of that campaign and as part of that work, we were told to go to the back of the bus, figuratively speaking. We were told to go to the back of the parade. We were told that this is not a movement for you. And frankly, as it was framed, it was not a movement for us. It was a movement around white women's issues and not issues that pertain to Black women. And the things that we've talked about this evening food and welfare and housing and fairness and equity. This was about white women who were, you know, the early feminists, so to speak, who were concerned about the roles of men and women. And as Fannie Lou has taught us in Dr. Young's portrayal, you know, we didn't have those issues. We didn't have those issues between Black men and Black women. We were, as you have described, Dr. Moses, patriots, and have continued to be largely over the years. So let me not go on one of my tangents, which I can do, but I want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about the whole idea of where are we now? What has the right to vote actually brought us, and how is that? What does that enable us to do? You know, Dr. Moses and very sensitive to the issue of the school to prison pipeline. And with some of our work with adolescent girls, we're, you know, trying to combat that whole idea that while we try to combat the idea, the reality is that there is a school to prison pipeline. And we've got to be sensitive to that, and we've got to work toward the elimination and the eradication of that pipeline, not just for, it's about Black people, period. Not just males, it's not just girls, it's not just boys, it's a pipeline that is taking us on a road to nowhere. So how do we, and I open this up to the three of you panelists and whoever would like to respond to it, how do we as a community how do we take the message of Fannie Lou Hamer? How do we internalize it? How do we make it our own? How do we organize, if you will, to bring the changes that are necessary? You know, and I keep hoping that they're going to happen in my lifetime, and I'm a little concerned about that because, you know, we're still talking the same talk 40, 50, 60 years later. But nevertheless, can we spend a few minutes, you know, either of the three of you who'd like to respond to the question, how has
let me just jump in a little bit and say this. When you pose that question, Ever, what do we do? One of the, I think the most important thing is organize and educate. But let's just talk about educate, which is part of why we do the GOLD program, the Girls Only Leadership Development Program. Most of our young people, our young women in particular, don't know our own history. And that's a fatal flaw, but it's our responsibility. We cannot rely on the powers that be to educate our own children about our own history. They need to know about Fannie Lou Hamer and the work that she has done. I know one of the things that we've done through GOAL, I do in my household, and I'm sure each of you have done in your own way, is I make sure I'm always infusing at the dinner table or wherever we might go. And sometimes we go very purposefully places like the museum in Washington, D.C., is to make sure, I make sure my young women in my family know the history, the struggle that women have had to go through. I sometimes use my own family as an example, or bringing the story of Fannie Lou Hamer forward. And it's hard with Fannie Lou Hamer because it's not a lot about her, particularly in film. And it's just the way a lot of our young people, if it's not on their phone or on their computer, they barely want to see it. So for me, it's incumbent on us to do two things: tell our own story about our own struggle, about our own path, but also bringing forward to young women in particular, but our community at large, where we have come from, how we have persevered, with a goal toward, now what are you going to do to carry that forward? So that, to me, it's leaving this legacy, this of information, historical information, to our community and to our kids. And then last, I'll just say this: women have been voting in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Massachusetts area, since the 1880s. But when I try to research the voting presence of Black women, it is increased. I can only go back to 1920. It's bringing that history forward so that they know how long we've been in the game, if you will, and what we've been able to accomplish in that time. Again, always reminding them that there's so much more to do to make sure we hold the ground that we've made and captured, but also to move forward.
I'm wondering if people have looked at, any of us has looked at Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste. It was recently published. The idea of caste is an old idea, goes back to the 20th century and beyond. Even the president of Harvard University, in his book Slums and Suburbs that he wrote in 1961, he said that America basically has been running a caste system, right? And that you see that most clearly in an education system. And I'm raising that because I think that part of the problem is in naming what we're dealing with. And there are two narratives, maybe more than two, but there are two main narratives I think that have been operating in this country. One is sort of the Horatio Alger. You do these things, you pick yourself up, and you work to be a part of the American woodwork, wherever that is. And we do that as individuals, right? We want, and we do that by some of the very things that Councilwoman Simmons has talked about, educating our own, giving them a history, learning the Black national anthem, all of those things that are very important. But to understand that this country is organized around the maintenance of caste, of a hierarchical system that keeps people of African descent at the bottom. And that's the way it's structured. And so and Fannie Lou, I think, understood that. We don't talk about that enough because in talking about it, it raises a different set of issues. It raises a different way forward. I don't have any, magic bullet in my pocket to say that this is the way forward, but to begin to look at our situation, to understand that it is the result of the structures of this society, right? The Constitution was structured on the agreement that Black people, both North and South, agreed that people of African descent would be slaves. In the North, if you ran away, they were obligated by the Constitution to return that person. This was a primal agreement of the Constitution. So I think that is that we have to rethink. We have to rethink where we have been and where we are going. Bayard Rustin, who was the big organizer, the main organizer for the March on Washington, and was very instrumental in all aspects of the civil rights movement, wrote a very cogent article in Commentary magazine in 1968. He said, from protest to politics. And he did not give MFDP and Mrs. Hamer shrift, but what he did say, he said the civil rights movement of the 1960s was organized basically to provide public accommodations. It was not organized to deal with the structures of this country that were indeed implicated in the oppression of Black people. And I'm paraphrasing it. This is huge. This is huge. So we have blood, sweat, tears, lost lives, right? And we are still spinning our wheels, I think partly because it's difficult to face the issue of caste. And unless we begin to think about how we are going to undo these structures, right, then the morbidity, the fallout from the system will continue, right, in every aspect, in the prisons, in the schools. In Cambridge, you can't find, Black men don't work in Cambridge. You think about the construction, and I go around and say, on any site in Cambridge and Boston, are there 10 Black men working? No. So this is an issue, and the issue for Black women, for us, and people faced this during the suffragette movement, right? what are your interests? What are your primary concerns? 1919, it's the year of the woman, it's the year of the white woman. 1919, you had more race riots in this country. Thousands of Black people were killed. It was Red Summer, 38 race riots where white people went on a rampage killing Black people in 1919. And so we look at this history, the year of the woman, it was also the year of this assault, right? From Connecticut to California, right? Most of it in Georgia against Black communities. And people don't talk about this, right? Because it creates another narrative about what we're looking at. So I think we have to examine this narrative and understand that we as a group, unless we come up with a plan that involves us as a group, we as individuals will always be exceptions. Obama is an exception, right? In the age when education, housing, health, right? Black women in morbidity is, greater now than in 1850. The discrepancy between white and Black women in childbirth, right? The discrepancy is greater now than it was in 1850, right? When there were African women delivering the babies on the plantation. So that's part of the education, to really take a hard, painful look at what we're looking at. And I think Wilkerson's book does help create another framework for us to see what we're facing. And when we see it, I think that we will have other answers. So I'm sorry to be so winded.
Thank you.
I'll just say briefly, the voter suppression that we're experiencing today, I point out to young people that, that's part of what Fannie Lou was fighting. People like her boss who wanted to stop and not allow Black people to register. And I must say that several of the things that have been mentioned here, some of them were cut out in the glitches in the play as we built up to the story. The story of SNCC's work, the story of with her boss man, the complete story. But I try to teach that, and in my work, I'm working this right now on getting out the vote. And I'm finding that our young people just don't know how we have been this way before. I remember that I didn't know until we started to elect a few Black people, and people would say, the first Black since Reconstruction. I didn't know it. Nobody ever taught me about Reconstruction. And I was out of school, And so I try to make sure that our students understand that history and know that much of what we're experiencing is retaliation for moving out of the place that's been set for us.
Yeah.
It's the place where people, the caste that you're referring to make your own decisions about your own life. And so there's been a reaction to that, which is why the fight must continue. That's what I needed to say about it.
I would also suggest that we look, and thank you very much for bringing up Reconstruction. We think about civil rights, and we think about civil rights in 1960. We need to go back to civil rights legislation of 1866. What Black people coming out of slavery demanded. The first public education system in the South was initiated during Reconstruction, Anti-Ku Klux Klan Act, which was overturned after the Detroit riots in 1967 with the doctrine of qualified immunity that this country is still holding on to, right? But in 1866, Africans said that we need to hold the police and officials accountable if they violate the civil rights of anybody, right? So 40 acres and a mule, that was real. right? So I've gotten 3 and I'm losing 2 of the other stipulations. But if we look at that civil rights legislation of 1866, they are asking for everything that we would ask for today. And the only thing that we've gotten out of that is public accommodations. That was the other thing that they demanded. The only thing we've gotten out of that is public accommodations. And by 1883, the Supreme Court had shut down all of that civil rights legislation. And from that time up to now, the Supreme Court has ensured, right, that Black people are not going to have the right to vote. You have the right, but you're not going to exercise it, right? That's the Roberts Court. So there's a history to all of this, and we have to understand that it's not just a history of our exceptionalism, right? But it's a history of this caste structure, and the only people who are going to be at the front end of getting rid of this is us, because we're the ones that's on our shoulders, right? But to understand that this is what we are battling, right? It's structured, it's by design, every aspect of it. But that legislation, and I think we should go back, that should be part of our education to understand that in 1866, this is what we demanded. And it was overthrown by the Supreme Court and violence. Right?
I apologize for interrupting. I feel like this conversation could go on for hours, for days. It's just so enlightening, and things that I knew a little bit about, I now know more about. My curiosity, my need to know, my own edification, all those things are now heightened. And I can't say thank you enough to our panelists, Counselor Simmons, Dr. Moses, Dr. Young. You are all phenomenal women. We are so fortunate to have you in our midst. I apologize to our listeners because we were supposed to have an opportunity for questions from audience, but didn't get there. So next time, and hopefully there will be a next time. Support Central Square Theater. They do good work. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Nina, and the rest of your staff. Support the YWCA Cambridge. YWCAs across the country, but we're in Cambridge, so support us. Good work too. It's been a pleasure. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this dialogue this evening and to learn. And there's part of me that wants to be 22 again when I had my big Angela Davis afro, and I just my grandmother used to tell me somebody's going to kill you. And fortunately not, but we've got struggles, we've got challenges, and in so many ways they haven't changed. But we've got to shift the paradigm. We've got to come to terms, if you will, with this caste system, and what it means and what it's created for us and how it's framed our lives, and then work to change it. So on that note, Courtney, is there anything you'd like to add before we adjourn for the
Yes,
evening?
I'd like to thank you, Eva. Thank you
My
for
pleasure.
shepherding this conversation and helping to make all this whole evening possible. And I just would like to further encourage everyone here to join us for more events this week. If you want to visit Central Square Theater's website, that we've got performances from our young folks and other performers, other conversations around other rich topics around voting and activism, and we would love to have everyone come and join us. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.